Hey billionaires, you're tuned in to the AFTERBUZZ TV after show for Billions Season 2, Episode 2, Dead Cat Bounce. Join me as I break down the episode and give you my thoughts and predictions. Let's go!
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin!
That's right, everybody. Welcome on in to the Billions After Show. I hope y'all are feeling much better than the cast of La La Land tonight. What an amazing disaster that show was. But welcome on in. Thank you for listening. It is the Billions After Show, and what an amazing episode we had tonight to discuss. I am your lead host, Frank Maiorana. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Go Frank M. Andrea is off this week. She will be back not next week, but the week after that to get back, and we miss her out there. Andy, I hope you're doing well. But what an amazing episode we had tonight to discuss, and it started just in such an amazingly flashy way with Axe and Krakow at the forum. But before that, I always like to start the show with our social media shout-outs, so please use the hashtag ABTVBillions out there, not only on Twitter, but commenting directly on our YouTube page. We love getting our listener feedback, and then I'm happy to read out your comments directly live on the air. So I wanted to highlight someone who commented on our YouTube stream from last week. This is Lori Stone Haskell, and she said, "My least favorite character is Wags 2. He is vulgar and crude. My favorites are Wendy and Axe. I don't think Wendy is going to join up with the new firm, but I think the head guy," she's referring to Krakow, "is going to continue to try to entice her." A great prediction, and obviously after seeing Wags last week, I felt the same way about you, but I did feel differently about Wags this week. He seems to really be going through a lot, and that whole scene in the sushi restaurant was actually really interesting to me, and I'll get into that in a minute. So thank you for commenting out there. I also had someone reach out to me on Twitter, just giving me a little bit more education about longing and shorting a stock. This comes from @JumpTheRock. She just said, long indicates that the stock will rise or go up, as opposed to shorting a stock, the stock will go down. It doesn't mean I am necessarily against the company. Whether I play long or short, I'm providing liquidity to the market. So that was interesting and good feedback. So appreciate you guys out there commenting to us. So continue to do so. Use that hashtag ABTVBillions. So let's start, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, the Axe versus Krakow forum, which was really funny to see the two guys squaring off. Especially, I noticed the height differential between Krakow and Axe. It's kind of funny, to see such a small guy trying to go up after Axe, but he lights a fire into Axe, and Axe eventually walks off stage. And, at the end of the episode, we saw them battling one another again, and Krakow doesn't seem to be really bothered by it. He's smiling throughout the whole bitter interaction and debate at the forum, and then at the end of the episode, even when they're on the phone with each other, you don't see Krakow lose it. You don't see him feeling threatened or pressured under the gun, sweating. There's none of that. It's more just that he's kind of excited to be in the game, in this chess match with Axe. And while we didn't really see Wendy interact with Krakow this episode, I think it's important to remember that she's going to be a key piece between the two, because they both want her. And I may be jumping a little bit ahead here right now in my predictions, but I think, given that Axe now has the option to get immunity and then say that his $5 million bonus to Wendy was a bribe to get Chuck out of the picture, that is a potential weapon that he could use, because that would take down Wendy as well. So obviously, that's something that Axe cares a lot about. He doesn't want to lose Wendy. In fact, he wants to bring Wendy back into Axe Capital. But now he has the opportunity to, if he wanted to, play some real dirty ball to bring her back in. But I don't see him doing that. I see him maybe using that as a weapon against Krakow to make him go away and to make him stop his pursuit of Wendy. Just because, he doesn't want Wendy anywhere else. If Axe can't have her, then nobody can. I could certainly see him taking that path, with this interaction. But we have our real battle this season. We have Team Axe and now we have Team Krakow. I mean, those are the two, because Chuck is so humbled this season. So the season this season in this show has shifted from a battle between Chuck and Axe to the battle now between Axe and Krakow, because Chuck is really under the gun. He's not investigating Axe Capital anymore. We saw that he's being investigated by Dake. The Attorney General wants to fire him. So Chuck has his own battles to fight that are exclusive from dealing with Bobby Axelrod. And even in tonight's episode, when the issue came up as to whether, and I believe Kate suggested this, Kate Sacker suggested, well, why don't we just go back after Axe Capital? And Chuck made a revealing remark that said, no, that's not going to help anything. So Chuck is, again, still hiding his true intentions from his team. And we talked about this a little bit last week, but I continue to see the further erosion of Chuck's team support for Chuck. And, that goes for, Connerty, Kate Sacker, and then Lonnie Watley, too. All of them are just sort of over their boss. And, they're becoming more and more aware that he's on the hot seat. And it's an interesting question to ponder. What would you do if your boss is imminently going to be fired and is basically asking you to help save his job when he's done wrong, that he's going nowhere fast, and ultimately, in some people's case, like Connerty, you want his job. So I really enjoyed the scene tonight between Connerty and Orrin Bach. I thought that was a lot of fun, just being outside a car, just having a drink with a former teacher and student between the two. And it's so true, when you're in school, and no matter what it is, if it's, you're in school of law, you're in school for acting, you're in school for anything in life, it's so much different when you get out into the real world and you start interacting with bosses and, they're acting a certain way. And it's like Bach said, like, oh, you mean we didn't talk about the vagaries? You mean how nothing we talked about within these four walls is truly followed? And that really rang true for me. I really liked that tonight. Because, when you get out in life, whether you're practicing law or doing, whatever you are in your career, there are always things that you did not prepare for in school. And, sometimes they can be questionable. So that's when you learn a lot about yourself, when you continue to go down a path and follow somebody who is, maybe not acting totally on the up and up, or do you leave them and try and strike out on your own? So I really enjoyed that scene tonight. And while the players here are still somewhat connected, this goes back to my point where Rhodes really isn't the primary antagonist for Axe this season. You can see Connerty going to Bach just for help, just for someone to talk to, a sounding board, which is interesting because last season, they were at each other's throats. And, they were on opposite sides of the table. And they had some meetings where, it was still sort of friendly, and Bach offered Connerty a job, come make $1,200 an hour. I mean, by the way, how nice is that? Even when Ira offered or told Chuck, hey, my rate's $1,400 an hour, it's like, wow, that is certainly enticing and would make you want to jump into being a higher end lawyer. So really like that. But back to my point, I like that they're sort of frenemies, teacher-student between Bach and Connerty, but they're able to talk about the issues that are going on in the Rhodes office without being adversarial. And I like that. I like that you can still be friends with somebody who may be working against you in the end. It made for an interesting scene. And speaking of that, that lawsuit and what Chuck is under. At the beginning of the episode, it looks like Chuck is going to be out in the free. His attorney, Ira, says, you know what, Chuck, I'm going to make this go away for you. Don't even worry about it. You have a certain type of immunity, so you're not even going to have to worry about this. And then later in the episode, Chuck gets a text that says, that was for the attorney general stuff. But Chuck goes out to dinner and is told later that there's more meat on the case than there was before, because some former associates of Chuck are going to actually testify against him. So it seems like the legal matters based on his practices are going much further than initially thought. And it happened very quickly. The pressure is ramping up on Chuck, with this outside legal matter, this class action suit that's being put together by not only former associates, but people that, Chuck used to work for and against. So the other thing about it, too, is that the Justice Department's giving him no attorney. So Ira is surprised by that. And the truth of the matter is, Chuck was about to be fired, and the Attorney General was about to let him go. And it took a significant amount of maneuvering on Chuck's part just to stay alive for a little bit longer. So he's not given an attorney to defend himself against this class action suits. The Justice Department is ready to cut ties with him. And yet he comes up with a brilliant idea, which really is Wendy's idea, because she suggests the 180 exercise for him. So he took his initial thought of, going after Spartan knives as being a bad idea, again suggested by Kate Sacker, and turns that into his reality. He uses Spiros to call a newspaper and starts this chain of reporting that makes it look like the district attorney's office is investigating Spartan knives. So it's a great move. And again, this may be wishful thinking, but when last week I said I see Wendy and Chuck getting closer, I think this was a small part of that. She says, here's an exercise I have. I know it'll help you. And she leaves it with him, and he thinks about it for maybe 30 to 60 seconds. And then he comes up with this idea to pursue Spartan knives. Instead of going against Goodstop, who is, against the administration and taking out a friend, the Attorney General doesn't go for that. So he switches to an ally. So now the political ramifications would be significant if the Attorney General fires a district attorney who is going after a friend of the administration. So it buys him some time. The Attorney General says, well, just buys you a couple months, I'll fire you then when the wind blows over. But Chuck just needed 3 days to make this move happen. If you give him a whole 90 or 120 days, he's going to come up with something much better. So he's been able to successfully get himself out of this problem. But it's just a temporary stay. So the real looming monster this season for Chuck is this class action lawsuit. And how does he get out of it? How does he wiggle himself away from these issues? And, there's a lot to handle for Chuck on the family end, trying to mend things with Wendy and dealing with the $5 million bonus that she received and the timing of it, which makes him look really bad. And of course you have Oliver Dake, who is sneaking around trying to dig up more and more dirt on Chuck. And, he's leading everyone down a path to say, you know what, Chuck Rhoades is dirty and, I want to take him down. And I thought the most surprising scene of tonight's episode was when Dake goes in to Bobby's office and says, I'll give you immunity if you testify against Rhodes to say that the $5 million bonus was a bribe. Now, on its face, without saying the second part, that would be a great idea for Axe to do. He gets rid of Rhodes forever. He doesn't have to worry about him anymore. He takes a temporary hit to his reputation, but nothing that is going to permanently damage him. Now the part that is giving Axe pause is that he doesn't want to hurt Wendy. And if he testifies that the $5 million bonus was a bribe, then Wendy's going to go down too. Wendy's going to go to jail too. And since the bonus was not obviously a bribe at all, Bobby's providing false testimony, which we've seen him play dirty tricks before, and it doesn't seem like a bad idea to him. until he gets to the Wendy part. And I really think that the bond there is too strong for him to eventually use the full extent of that offer. Now, I do think a piece of that is going to be used in the Krakow fight that Axe has going on right now. He may tell Krakow, you know what, I can make her go away forever. You know, you're never going to have her. I've got something on her, you know, something like that. I think, you know, he wants to keep Wendy out of it. He doesn't want to hurt her any more than he already has. You know, Axe's goal and his objective is to get Wendy back in the firm. So he's not going to go out and say to Wendy, you know, hey, if you don't come back to me, then I'm going to testify against you in court. That's just too lowbrow. It's not smart of him. And Axe is way too smart, as we saw, you know, many times throughout this episode. Before I get into the next topic, I want to remind everyone, please subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up. Also, you can subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever else podcasts can be found. We are on the podcasts app on iTunes, the podcast app directly on iOS as well. So give us a subscribe and a thumbs up there for the AFTERBUZZ TV Billions after show. Next, I think the most interesting character tonight and this season so far has been Asia Kate Dillon, who is playing Taylor, the intern. And it's exciting to see somebody that smart and on Axe's level. And to be honest, when I was watching tonight's episode, I had to rewind it a couple times to get all of the financial terms and the discussions that were going on between Bobby and Taylor, because they're both operating on such a high level that that I couldn't keep pace with all of it. So I'm sure a few of you were rewinding as well. But, you know, Taylor goes from being an intern to being offered $1 million a year in, you know, a very short time. And it's due to the way that they think and the way that they're processing information so quickly and thinking things through. And eventually Bobby sees it for what it is, that Taylor is testing him, that Taylor is seeing if Axe is the real deal, and he is. And ultimately, you know, you could see it in Taylor's eyes when you were watching the balcony scene between the two when he was offering Taylor a job, was that they were really impressed with Bobby and really enjoyed you know, that moment between the two. And ultimately, Taylor gets Bobby to agree to a weekly deal at a prorated $1 million a week. Or, excuse me, not $1 million a week. Wouldn't that be amazing? $1 million per year, which is prorated weekly. And what a great deal that is. Wouldn't it be nice to know you can work week to week with where you're at? Just another one of those fun moments of this show where we see big dollar figures being thrown around. And it's a bit of, you know, fantasy life to be given an offer like that. But, you know, I think more than anything else, the character of Taylor is super smart and is thinking so much higher than Maffei. And I cracked up a couple times tonight just watching Bobby just completely discard and dismiss anything that Maffei has to say. It's like, yes, Maffei, everybody knows that. And Taylor steps forward and has much more detailed information about satellite images and the Chinese staging fake trucking activity outside of a factory. That was amazing. I mean, and I'm sure this type of thing goes on, but that was so interesting to see that a company could fake activity based on satellite images that companies are using to see which warehouses are being, you know, are in, seeing a lot of action, seeing a lot of orders, and that way they'll know where to invest their money. And then, of course, we see our boy, friend of the show, Kelly Aucoin, as Dollar Bill Stern, actually went over and got some pictures of the factory and saw that it was a total fraud. So Taylor's assumptions about the company end up being totally correct and makes Axe millions of dollars, which leads to the offer that Taylor receives out on the balcony. So I think, you know, we have a new star of Axe Capital, especially with what's going on with Wags and him sort of seeming to fall off the wagon. He has some emotional stuff going on that leads him to blow up at a sushi restaurant and not show the proper respect that he has for this chef who creates these really good sushi dishes. And I totally understand, like, you don't need to dump a bunch of sushi in soy sauce and make it swim in there. There's some sushi that you're just supposed to eat without soy sauce. So I can appreciate, not wanting to eat filet mignon with ketchup. It's kind of the same thing. So I actually really like that scene. And I think Wags maybe stumbling a bit is really interesting. And if we can tone down the pushing nature that he had in the first season and even the first episode, just with all the vulgarity, as our listener said at the top of the episode, I think he becomes a far more interesting character if he's falling off a step. Bobby even said during the episode, you're supposed to know my heart. Where are you at on this? You okay? So he's taking a step or two down, and he has some internal issues going on. Dr. Gus asks him about it at the restaurant. What do you think of this? And, how about we talk? And, you can see that there's something going on there with Wags, and there's a lot more internal work going, which is what I like as a viewer, to see Wags internalizing the strife that's going on within him, as opposed to all the external stuff where he's, trying to be a big shot in front of everybody. So, my Wags hate is going to stop for a week. It's going to stop for this week. And we'll see where we end up next week. I mentioned Dr. Gus, an interesting character, a blowhard therapist, which was really interesting. I thought the entrance was actually really good when he shows up. He's got his muscles hanging out. He just rolls up in Axe Capital and sits down and gives, Ben Kim a talking to, are you a hard ass, a no ass, or whatever? And Ben goes, sorry. He's just, he's much more like drill sergeant than therapist, and makes Ben feel uncomfortable. He's like, I'm not comfortable with this. And he's like, I don't care if you're comfortable. I'm going to make you into a monster killer. And, he's just not a therapist you would ever want to go to confess your deepest, darkest secrets. And then he walks out into the common area of the workplace and says, that guy hasn't had sex with his wife in 6 months, which is crazy. I mean, you would never want anybody to know that. So the confidentiality seal is not there whatsoever, as opposed to Wendy, who even said in this episode that she would rather go to jail than give up information on her patients. So the quality of the therapy at Axe Capital has gone down significantly since Wendy left. So we'll see how long Dr. Gus lasts. He's definitely shading more to being an ally of Wags and his style of doing things. But I don't think he's going to last very long. I think he'll be, in for the next 2-3 episodes, and then he's going to do something that's just too outlandish to allow him to stay, which is going to drive up the stakes even more for Bobby to get Wendy back. We had Dake. I thought another interesting scene, we had Dake and Wendy, talking to each other as Dake interviews her about her $5 million bonus. And while she's not specifically on the line here, Dake is not coming after Wendy to put her in jail. His true target is Chuck, and them being separated, I think Dake sees an opportunity to drive a wedge between them and maybe take advantage of a jilted, separated wife who's angry at her husband. But she doesn't budge. And, this is what I talked about last week when I said that I really liked the two of them, Wendy and Chuck, being together and loving each other, because it's so much more interesting when they support each other against outside enemies. And this is exactly what I was talking about, where Wendy is, not giving Dake anything. And while she does sort of give a half answer on She's like, oh no, I can't specifically deny about the recusal as to whether or not Chuck fully recused himself. That to me wasn't a huge transgression or a betrayal of trust for Chuck. She didn't implicate him in anything. And if anything at all, I really believe that she had Chuck's best interests at heart during that whole interview. And, when they went to therapy together and they had the therapist clear out of the room and just had a genuine moment between the two, I thought that was great. I mean, I thought that was wonderful acting between two actors who are totally accomplished, but characters who are at odds with each other right now. Chuck's at a very low point. He doesn't have a lot of fight in him right now because he sees himself in a lot of trouble legally and at his current job. He's preparing to be fired. At this point, he still doesn't know what he's going to do about the whole Spartan Knives situation. So he's at an all-time low, and he doesn't have time to be fighting with his wife. And I think Wendy takes pity on him. This once powerful husband of hers has been weakened and brought to his knees, with these legal matters. So it was sad to see, but it was a touching moment between two people who maybe still love each other. Maybe I'm just hoping against hope here. But I really think that they've taken small steps this week to ultimately reconciling. So I'm sticking with my prediction of last week, and I know Andy is going to totally disagree with me when she gets back, but that's where I see it. So let me move into my final segment of the night, which is predictions to come for the next week and for the rest of the season. I talked about it a lot, but I want to predict that Chuck and Wendy will reconcile. And I also think that Chuck is going to get out of his class action lawsuit somehow. There was a mention made in tonight's episode by Ira that, Chuck has a limited immunity. So I do see him ultimately getting out of this legal matter and being free once again to pursue Axe. Because remember, this was the whole premise of the show. We have Axe versus Rhodes, and on all the billboards, on all the marketing material, you see these two guys looking at each other like they're two boxers and they're about to have a heavyweight fight. And so far this season, we haven't seen that at all. So I think we got to get the Chuck legal matters out of the way. We got to get him his job security back. And, we got to get Dake out of the picture before those two can really start battling each other once again. So I do see that happening. And then, oh gosh, the question for me on Wendy is, what is Wendy going to do? And Wendy is again going to be caught between Axe and Krakow. And, we have this whole bonus thing hanging over both of our heads. I think, oh man, if I'm really going to go for a big prediction here, I'm going to say that Wendy's going to be back at Axe Capital as the in-house therapist. And Bobby's ultimately going to, I bet you he'll make Dake go away somehow. There's another bold prediction for you. I think Axe ultimately will make Dake go away as a condition for getting Wendy to come back to Axe Capital. How's that for a prediction? I'm going to leave it right there for this week because that's my mic dropper right there. And if I'm right about that, I will be bragging about that for a long time. So thank you all so much for listening this week. I will be back next week at 10 p.m. Pacific live. You can watch us on YouTube or just stream the podcast afterwards, again, on the podcast app, on iOS and elsewhere. So thank you so much for listening. I have been your host, Frank Maiorana. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Go Frank M. Go out, be blessed. I'll see you back soon.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.